This woman named Brooke destroyed her 3-year marriage in a single drunken night at a bachelorette party in Miami. Now, 12 months later, she's watching her husband walk away from her completely transformed, living his best life in a luxury penthouse, while she sits alone in their empty house, finally understanding what it truly means to lose someone who was once completely devoted to you. This is her story, and I'm Emma, your storyteller on Mrs. Emma channel. Brooke is 32 years old, and right now she's living through what she calls the worst consequence of her life. Her husband Nate has become someone entirely different. Someone who looks at her like she's optional. Someone who acts like he could walk away tomorrow and upgrade his entire existence. And the most painful part? She knows she brought this on herself. It all began with what seemed like an innocent girl's weekend. Her best friend Melissa was getting married, and the bridesmaids planned this elaborate bachelorette celebration in Miami. Sun, sand, cocktails, and freedom. When Brooke told Nate about the trip, he wasn't exactly supportive. He had this uncomfortable look on his face, like he wanted to say something but was holding back. But Brooke brushed off his concerns completely. "I don't need your permission," she told him with an edge in her voice. "I'm a grown woman. It's just a weekend with my girlfriends. What could possibly go wrong?" Those words would come back to haunt her in ways she never imagined. The first evening in Miami was harmless enough. The group had dinner at a beautiful oceanfront restaurant, shared some margaritas, laughed about old memories, and headed back to their hotel relatively early. Everyone was tired from traveling. It was sweet, innocent, exactly what Brooke had promised Nate it would be. But the second night changed everything. The girls decided to hit a popular nightclub downtown. Brooke remembers getting ready in her hotel room, putting on this tight new dress she'd bought specifically for the trip, curling her hair into perfect waves, applying makeup with extra care. She felt attractive, confident, free from the routine of married life, if only for one night. The alcohol started flowing early. First it was cocktails at dinner, then shots at the club, then more cocktails, then more shots. The music was pounding so loudly she could feel it vibrating through her chest. The lights were flashing in chaotic patterns of blue and purple and red. Her head was spinning, but in that moment she felt completely alive. That's when she noticed him across the dance floor. A guy with dark hair, strong jawline, tall frame. In her intoxicated state, something clicked in her brain. He reminded her of Nate. Actually, her drunk mind convinced her that he looked exactly like her husband. Same hair color, same build, same confident stance. He could be Nate's twin, she remembered thinking, which now sounds absolutely ridiculous even to her own ears. She started dancing near him, then, with him. Their bodies moved closer together with each song. She rationalized everything happening in real time. "He looks just like my husband, so it's basically like dancing with Nate," her alcohol-soaked brain whispered. What's the harm? The next clear memory Brooke has is waking up in an unfamiliar hotel room with sunlight streaming through curtains she didn't recognize. She turned her head slowly, brain pounding, and saw him lying next to her. This stranger. This man who absolutely did not look anything like Nate in the harsh morning light. Panic hit her like a freight train. She grabbed her clothes scattered across the floor, dressed as quickly as her shaking hands would allow, and practically ran out of that hotel room. She didn't even know his name, didn't remember how they got there, couldn't piece together the sequence of events that led from the dance floor to his bed. When she made it back to her own hotel, mascara smudged down her face and wearing last night's dress, she ran straight into Tiffany, one of the other bridesmaids, in the hallway. There was no hiding what had happened. The walk of shame was written all over her. Brooke completely broke down. Tears streaming, voice shaking, she confessed everything to Tiffany. "I made the worst mistake of my life," she sobbed. "Please, you can't tell anyone. Especially not Nate. This can never get back to him." Tiffany hugged her and made a promise. "Your secret is safe with me. I won't say a word." Brooke actually believed her. Flying home felt like torture. Every time the plane hit turbulence, her stomach dropped, but not from the movement. It was pure guilt eating her alive from the inside out. She kept replaying the night in her head, trying to remember more details, trying to understand how she let things go so far. When Nate picked her up from the airport, She plastered on the biggest smile she could manage. "How was the trip?" he asked casually, loading her suitcase into the trunk. "Amazing," she lied smoothly. "Just what I needed. The girls had so much fun." She spent the next several weeks in complete overdrive, trying to be the perfect wife. She initiated intimacy constantly. She cooked his favorite meals every night. She smiled more, laughed at all his jokes, asked about his day with genuine interest. She was overcompensating, and some part of her knew it, but she couldn't stop herself. For a few weeks, she actually started to believe she'd gotten away with it. The secret would stay buried in Miami, and her marriage would continue exactly as it had before. She convinced herself that what Nate didn't know couldn't hurt him, and that this one terrible mistake didn't have to define the rest of their lives together. Then came the phone call that shattered everything. "Can you meet me for lunch today?" Nate's voice came through her cell phone while she was at work. Something about his tone immediately set off alarm bells in her head. It wasn't warm. It wasn't casual. It was controlled in a way that frightened her. "Sure," she managed to say, her heart already racing. "Where?" He named a restaurant downtown, then hung up without the usual, "I love you," he always ended calls with. Brooke barely remembers driving there. Her hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Her mind raced through possibilities. Maybe he was planning a surprise. Maybe he wanted to talk about vacation plans. Maybe it was nothing at all. But when she walked into that restaurant and saw Nate sitting at a corner table, she knew immediately. His face was completely blank, devoid of any emotion, but his ears were bright red. That was always his tell when he was furious. Absolutely enraged, but trying desperately to maintain control. She sat down across from him, unable to speak. "I know what happened in Miami," he said simply, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity she'd never seen before. They looked cold, almost like he was staring at a stranger. Her entire world collapsed in that single moment. "Nate, I can explain," she started, but he held up one hand to silence her. "Tiffany's husband is friends with someone at my office. Word travels. I know everything." Brooke lost it right there in the middle of that restaurant. She started sobbing uncontrollably, mascara running down her face in black streams, words tumbling out in a desperate, incoherent mess. "I was so drunk I didn't know what I was doing. He looked just like you, I swear. In the club lighting, he could have been your twin." "It was one mistake, one horrible, stupid mistake. I love you so much, Nate. Please, you have to believe me. It meant nothing, absolutely nothing." Every excuse sounded more pathetic than the last, even to her own ears. The "he looked like you" defense was particularly weak, and she knew it. But she was grasping at anything that might make him understand, might make him forgive her. Nate just sat there watching her meltdown with this detached expression, like he was observing something happening to someone else entirely. When her words finally ran out, when she had nothing left to say, he simply stood up from the table. He pulled out his wallet, placed enough cash to cover both meals on the table, and looked down at her one final time. "I need some time," he said quietly. "Don't call me, don't text me, don't try to reach me at all. I'll contact you when I'm ready." Then he walked out, leaving her sitting alone at that table with other diners staring at her tear-stained face. The next week was the longest of Brooke's entire life. Nate didn't come home. She didn't know where he was staying. He wouldn't answer her calls or respond to her messages. She left tearful voicemails begging him to talk to her, to give her a chance to make things right, to not throw away their marriage over one mistake. She barely ate. She couldn't sleep. Every time a car drove past their house, she jumped up hoping it was him. Her imagination tortured her with possibilities. Was he talking to divorce attorneys? Was he tracking down the guy from Miami? Was he already moving on with someone else? When Nate finally came home 7 days later, he looked completely different. Calmer, somehow. But also colder, more distant, like he'd made decisions that couldn't be unmade. He sat her down on their couch and laid out his terms with the precision of a business negotiation. "Here's what needs to happen if you want to save this marriage," he said, his voice even and controlled. "No more alcohol, not socially, not at home, not ever. No more girls' trips or weekends away without me. Complete transparency with your phone, your social media, your location at all times. And if you slip up even once, if you break even one of these rules, I'm gone. No second chances. No more conversations. Done. Brooke agreed to everything immediately. She would have agreed to anything in that moment. She was just so grateful, so relieved that he was willing to give their marriage another chance at all. I promise, she said, grabbing his hands. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll never touch alcohol again. I'll be completely transparent about everything. You won't regret giving me this opportunity. That was 1 year ago, and things never, ever went back to normal. About a month after their reconciliation, Brooke started noticing changes in Nate. Subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. Her husband had always been attractive. At 39 years old, he was tall, naturally fit, carried himself with quiet confidence. But suddenly, he kicked everything into high gear. He started going to the gym 6 days a week instead of his usual 3. He began meal prepping these elaborate high-protein lunches with perfectly measured portions. He downloaded meditation apps and spent time each morning sitting quietly with his eyes closed. He bought an entirely new wardrobe, every piece fitting his increasingly muscular frame perfectly. At first, Brooke thought it was hot. Her husband was getting even more attractive, even more physically impressive. She figured this was his way of rebuilding his confidence after what she'd done to him. Maybe working on himself physically was helping him process the emotional trauma. She even tried joining him at the gym a few times, thinking they could turn this into something they did together, a way to reconnect and strengthen their bond. But Nate made it very clear that wasn't welcome. "This is my thing," he said curtly when she showed up in workout clothes. "I need space for this." That's when she realized something fundamental had shifted. The old Nate would have been thrilled to have her join him for workouts. He would have been excited to share this part of his life with her. This new version seemed annoyed by her presence, like she was intruding on something private. When she tried to be flirty about his new muscles, running her hands over his increasingly defined arms and chest, he'd just say thanks, with barely a smile, and continue whatever he was doing. No playful banter, no reciprocal affection, nothing. The physical changes were just the beginning. His entire focus and priorities seemed to shift completely. He started staying late at the office regularly, telling her he was positioning himself for a promotion. Their weekend brunches, which used to be sacred time together, disappeared completely. They were replaced with networking events and professional development seminars that she wasn't invited to. Their date nights dwindled from weekly to maybe once a month, and even during those rare occasions, Nate seemed distracted. His mind was clearly somewhere else. "I'm just working toward our future," he'd say, whenever she complained about his absence. But it felt more like he was working toward his future, and she was no longer an essential part of the equation. Then came the work social events. Suddenly, there were constant happy hours and client dinners happening, and Brooke was never invited to any of them. "It's just work stuff," Nate would explain dismissively. "You'd be bored out of your mind. Trust me." He'd come home late from these events smelling like expensive cologne that she hadn't bought him. Sometimes there was a faint hint of perfume that definitely wasn't hers. When she worked up the courage to question him about these late nights, he'd roll his eyes like she was being unreasonable. "I'm networking, Brooke. That's how you advance your career, how you get ahead in the professional world. You wouldn't understand, because you've never had these kinds of ambitions." His words stung every single time. One evening, Brooke found a long blonde hair on his jacket when she was hanging it up. Her stomach dropped. She held it up when he walked into the room, her hand shaking. "What's this?" Nate barely glanced at it. "Probably from Stephanie in accounting. We were stuck in the same elevator earlier, it was crowded." His explanation was so casual, so completely dismissive, that it made her feel insane for even asking, like she was being paranoid and jealous over absolutely nothing. The worst part of everything was how their intimate life completely changed. Before Miami, Nate was always the one initiating physical intimacy. He was always touching her, pulling her close, whispering how beautiful she was, how lucky he felt to have her as his wife. Now, he rarely made the first move. When they did have relations, it felt mechanical and empty, like he was just going through the motions because it was expected, not because he actually wanted her. "Is something wrong?" she asked him one night after a particularly disconnected encounter. "You seem so distant." "Nothing's wrong," he replied, already rolling away from her and facing the opposite wall. Just tired from the gym. Brooke tried everything she could think of to recapture his attention and desire. She bought expensive new lingerie. She surprised him with lunch at his office. She sent him flirty text messages during the day. His responses became increasingly lukewarm and brief. It was like watching someone slowly check out of a relationship while still physically occupying the same space. He wasn't leaving, not technically, but emotionally he was already halfway out the door. And the absolute worst part was that Brooke couldn't really blame him. She had caused this. Her choices in Miami had broken something fundamental between them. She understood that on an intellectual level. But she also couldn't shake this growing feeling that there was more happening here than just a man recovering from betrayal. Something else was going on with Nate, and it terrified her more than she could express. Everything came to a breaking point 3 months ago at a fancy work party Nate actually invited her to attend. Brooke spent hours getting ready for the event. She bought a new dress, went to the salon for her hair and makeup, picked out her best jewelry. She thought maybe this invitation meant he was finally bringing her back into his life in a meaningful way. She should have known better. The moment they walked into that rooftop venue with its glittering city views and sophisticated crowd, Brooke realized why Nate had brought her. He wanted her to see exactly what she was competing against. He wanted her to understand her position. The room was filled with absolutely gorgeous women, the kind with impossibly long legs, perfect figures, designer everything, and they all seemed to know her husband personally. "Nate, oh my God, you look incredible!" This tall redhead practically launched herself at him the second they arrived, air-kissing both his cheeks with theatrical enthusiasm. "That new workout routine is definitely paying off. You look amazing." She gave him this obvious up-and-down look that made Brooke want to grab her by her shiny red hair and pull. "Thanks, Vanessa," Nate replied with a genuine smile. The kind of warm smile Brooke hadn't seen directed at her in months. "The personal trainer you recommended is brutal, but definitely worth it." Throughout the entire evening, it was the same pattern repeated over and over. Different women would spot Nate, their faces would light up like he was some kind of celebrity, and they'd come over with their perfect bodies and their designer outfits to fawn all over him. Brooke stood there in her dress from Target, which had looked amazing in her bedroom mirror, but now felt cheap and dowdy, feeling like complete garbage. "Who are all these women?" she whispered to Nate during a brief moment when they were alone. "Just colleagues," he said casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "That's Vanessa. She's a model our firm represents. Same with Alexis over there. And Madison." Brooke glanced over at Madison. She was probably 25 years old, tall and blonde, wearing a dress that cost more than their monthly mortgage payment. "You represent a lot of models, huh?" Brooke couldn't keep the bitter edge out of her voice. Nate just shrugged. "The entertainment division is growing rapidly. It's good for business and my career." As the night dragged on, Brooke watched these women flirt shamelessly with her husband. They touched his arm while laughing at his jokes. They whispered things in his ear that made him smirk. One even had the audacity to straighten his tie, her hands lingering on his chest longer than necessary. The absolute worst part was that Nate wasn't exactly flirting back, but he wasn't shutting it down either. There were knowing smiles here, playful winks there. He was clearly enjoying the attention while Brooke stood beside him like some pathetic accessory he'd brought along for appearances. When one particularly stunning brunette handed Nate her business card for coffee sometime, Brooke had finally had enough. She grabbed his arm the second the woman walked away. "What is happening right now? Are you seriously going to get coffee with her?" Nate slipped the card into his pocket with an infuriatingly casual shrug. "It's networking, Brooke. That's how business works in this industry." "That wasn't business," she hissed, trying to keep her voice down. "She was practically undressing you with her eyes right in front of me." He gave her this look, this mixture of amusement and pity, that made her feel 2 inches tall. "Don't worry about it," he said lightly. "It's not a bachelorette party in Miami." The comment hit her like a physical slap. He had never thrown her mistake in her face so blatantly before this moment. She stood there completely speechless as he walked off to chat with some senior partner, leaving her alone at the bar feeling humiliated. On the Uber ride home, she tried to talk to him about what had happened. Those women were all over you tonight, and you did absolutely nothing to stop it. They were being friendly and professional, he replied, staring out the window. You're overreacting dramatically. Friendly? That blonde literally asked if you'd been working out while staring directly at your crotch, Nate. He just continued looking out the window. Maybe you're projecting your own behavior onto innocent social interactions. Not everyone crosses inappropriate lines when they're being social. Another dig at her infidelity. Another reminder of her failure. Brooke shut up after that, spending the rest of the ride in miserable silence. That night, watching him move around their bathroom getting ready for bed, his body more defined and impressive than she'd ever seen it, a terrifying thought hit her with absolute clarity. Her husband was transforming into someone who was completely out of her league, and he knew it. He was doing it deliberately. After that party, Brooke's paranoia spiraled completely out of control. She started checking his phone constantly whenever he left it unattended, scrolling obsessively through his texts, his emails, his call history, searching desperately for evidence of something. Anything. Most days she found absolutely nothing suspicious. Just work emails about projects and meetings, texts with his gym friend about protein powder recommendations, normal mundane stuff. But somehow the lack of evidence made everything worse. If he was cheating or planning to leave, he was being incredibly careful about covering his tracks. She began tracking his location through his phone, watching that little dot move from their house to his office to the gym. Occasionally, it would stop at restaurants or bars she didn't recognize. During these unknown stops, she'd text him casually. "How's your day going?" Just to see how long it took him to respond and what excuse he'd provide. In a meeting or grabbing coffee with the team were his usual responses. Nothing she could prove was a lie, but nothing that gave her any real reassurance either. The Nate she'd married would have sent her pictures of his colleagues, would have invited her to join them for drinks after work. This new version kept his professional and personal worlds completely separate, and he seemed perfectly content with that arrangement. Brooke started dropping by his office unexpectedly, bringing lunch, just because she was in the area. The receptionist always had this pitying look when she saw Brooke arriving, like she knew something Brooke didn't. Nate would emerge from his office looking annoyed rather than pleased. He'd accept the lunch with a tight, forced smile before practically ushering her back to the elevator. "You can't just show up here unannounced, Brooke," he'd say with clear irritation. "I have meetings scheduled, clients waiting. It's unprofessional and embarrassing." Before her mistake, he'd always been genuinely thrilled to see her at his office. Now she was just an inconvenience and an embarrassment. One afternoon, Brooke drove by the gym during his usual workout time, just to verify that's where he actually was like he claimed. She spotted his car in the parking lot and felt momentary relief wash over her, until she went inside and couldn't find him anywhere on the gym floor. When she asked at the front desk, they said he'd checked in but was probably in one of the private training rooms. Private training rooms? Since when did Nate need private training sessions? Brooke waited in the parking lot for 40 long minutes, her anxiety building with each passing moment. When Nate finally emerged, he was with a fit woman in tight workout clothes. They were both laughing about something as they walked to their cars in the fading evening light. No touching, nothing obviously inappropriate, but the familiar, comfortable way they talked to each other made Brooke's stomach turn violently. When Nate got home that evening, she asked casually about his workout. "Did you go alone today?" "Yeah, just the usual routine," he said without looking up from his phone. "Nothing special." The lie hung heavy in the air between them. Brooke wanted desperately to confront him, to scream about the woman she'd seen him with. But what proof did she actually have? They were just talking. If she accused him of something more serious, he'd know immediately that she was following him, spying on him, invading his privacy. So she swallowed her suspicion and said nothing at all. It wasn't just his potential infidelity eating away at her sanity. It was the way other women looked at him now. Everywhere they went together, at the grocery store, at restaurants, even at church, female eyes followed him constantly, taking in his tall frame, his now chiseled jawline, the confident way he carried himself through the world. And the way he looked at Brooke had changed fundamentally, too. There was this clinical quality to his gaze now, like he was constantly evaluating whether she was still worth his time and energy. The man who once couldn't keep his hands off her now seemed to touch her only out of obligation or routine. When he did offer compliments anymore, they felt completely hollow. "You look nice" had replaced "you're beautiful" or "I'm the luckiest man alive to have you." His words were technically positive, but they lacked any real warmth or genuine desire behind them. One night, after he declined her advances for the third time that week, Brooke completely broke down. "Are you punishing me? Is that what all of this is about?" He looked genuinely confused by the question. "What are you talking about?" "This!" She gestured wildly at the space between them. "You're so distant, so cold toward me. You barely touch me anymore. If you haven't forgiven me for Miami, just say so directly." Nate sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair, a new nervous habit he'd developed recently. "I'm not punishing you, Brooke. I'm just focused on myself right now, on my career growth, on my physical health, on my mental well-being. Is that really so wrong?" "It is when it feels like you're actively preparing for a life that doesn't include me," she said, her voice breaking. He didn't deny it. He just looked at her with those unreadable eyes and said something that chilled her to her core. "I'm preparing for a better life. Whether you're in it or not is completely up to you." Brooke had never felt more terrified in her entire marriage than in that moment. A few weeks after her parking lot stakeout incident, Brooke decided enough was enough. If Nate was having an affair, she deserved to know the truth. If he wasn't, then he needed to stop acting like he was constantly preparing to trade her in for a newer, better model. She waited until he was home on a Saturday afternoon. He was sitting on the couch reading something on his tablet, glasses perched on his nose. Another new addition to his appearance that somehow made him even more attractive. Damn it. Brooke sat down across from him, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "We need to talk," she said, using the same serious tone he'd used when confronting her about Miami. He looked up from his tablet, his expression carefully neutral. "About what?" "About whatever's going on with you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "The late nights at work, the private training sessions you lie about, the women from your office who call you after hours." She'd heard him once, taking a call in their backyard around 10 at night, laughing softly into the phone in a way that made her chest ache. "Are you having an affair? Because if you are, I deserve to know the truth." Nate removed his glasses slowly and deliberately, setting them aside along with his tablet. For just a moment, she thought she saw a flash of the old Nate, the one who used to be open with her, who shared everything.